release your, app into the world and get Twitter bombed because you forgot to test on the Samsung. And somebody doesn't like it, and then that's the end of your app. Okay? So when we talk about testing, we start to think about how we're going to develop for mobile. There's this long-standing kind of argument: do we do native apps or do we do mobile web? Okay, and far be it from me to tell you which one you should do. All right, but the numbers say that they're basically about half and half. Okay, if you look at the percentage of mobile apps, so the red line are mobile web and the black are apps. So depending upon how you want to break it up, but anyways, there's kind of half and half in terms of what's actually out there today. So what I want to talk about today is a strategy for each. All right, so how do we automate if you're using native apps, and how do we automate if you're using the mobile web? Okay. And it's not the same strategy. Well, it could be, but it's not always. All right. So we're going to talk about two tools. All right. So for native apps, the tool to use says TouchTest is actually what it's called, TouchTest, which is extremely powerful. It can run actual real devices and very simply and effectively test native apps. And for mobile web, we use Selenium. If you've ever done any sort of web automation, you've probably heard of Selenium. All right.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it works for mobile web as well, so no need to change there. Okay. So for mobile web, Selenium these days is the de facto standard, and as of about 3 years ago, it became the #1 tool, surpassing Quick Test Professional, which was the #1 tool for a long time. Okay. But it is now the #1 tool for web. Okay. So Selenium is now called WebDriver, so we use the terms interchangeably, so don't get confused if I start talking about WebDriver. But there is a WebDriver for iOS and there's a WebDriver for Android. Okay, and the WebDriver for iOS and Android, they both support running on the device itself or running through an emulator. Okay. So you can use the same exact script that you use for a web to drive your Chrome or your Firefox or whatever, and it will connect to the WebDriver for iOS or for Android. Okay, the way that Selenium 2 or WebDriver is implemented is there's something called a WebDriver wire protocol, which is an API which every WebDriver implementation has to follow. So if you write a WebDriver for iOS, you have to support or accept the exact same commands that the WebDriver for Android, that the WebDriver for Chrome, that the WebDriver for whoever supports. Okay, so it makes it very expandable and it makes it for testers, it makes it easier for us to test other devices. Okay, so we can write a script and run it in a lot of different places. Okay. Because I suspect there's probably some Android users here. We'll talk about Android first. How do we get WebDriver working on an Android device, or in this case, we'll talk about an emulator. All right. So if you've done Android development, you've probably done this before. Using the Android SDK, they have a tool, the ABD, which allows you to create virtual machines, right? Which becomes your emulator. All right. So a simple command: Android create, give it a name, give it a target, and that target, you can look up the numbers different on every system, but that target could be, your Samsung or your Nexus or whatever. So it's basically what you want to emulate, and then memory. All right. So you set up your virtual machine. Okay, then you install WebDriver on your machine. Okay, WebDriver can be downloaded from the Selenium website. Just search for Android WebDriver, and they give you Android server.apk. Okay. So again, using the SDK tools, you can install it. The serial ID will be the ID that's on the top of the screen, on the title bar when you run your Android emulator. There'll usually be a name. Emulator 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Okay. Once you have it installed, you can manually browse there and run it. But since we're doing automation, we don't like to do anything manually. So you can, again, through the Android SDK, you can start any app from the command line. Right. You can even do it on a phone if that phone is tethered, if it's plugged in. Right. But also from the emulator. So this would be the command: is shell am start, and then it just has the information. Okay. And so this is the app itself. OpenQA Selenium Android.app. Okay. For web testing, it's helpful to run this in debug mode, right? Because if your web test fails, it'll dump a whole bunch of information, so you can try to tell: is there something wrong with my app? Is there something wrong with my script, or whatever? Okay. So I just add the debug flag. Okay. Once it's running, then you need to forward the ports so that you can, from your machine, talk to the Android device. So here I'm just saying, basically, TCP port 8080, on the Android device, or in this case the Android emulator, map it to 8080 on my machine, and that'll create a tunnel. So when I go to 8080, in this case it will go to the Android emulator. Okay. So those are the only 3 steps that you really need to do, and then you have a scriptable device. Right. So you've got in this case, we've got a virtual machine that's running Android that we can script. Okay. Again, since we're doing automation, that's too many commands to type, so we put it in a bash script. This is basically what a bash script would look like. Okay. The only slight difference is there's no way to actually tell when the Android virtual machine is finished booting up. At least not the command line. It's just doesn't give you any. It returns the command returns straight away, and then it takes 6 years for it to boot up. All right. So basically, this little loop says we try to start WebDriver, and if it fails, we sleep for a second, and we start it again. We start it again. Okay. So I first wait for 10 seconds for the emulator to come up. Then I keep trying to start WebDriver until it starts, and then I forward the ports. All right. So again, wait 10 seconds for the Android emulator to come up. I mean, all the Android developers know that fucking nonsense. It doesn't happen, right? It should probably be, something more like go out and get a coffee and then hopefully it'll be done, and wait forever. Because it takes forever. Now, fortunately, with the latest version of the Android SDK, they now have a feature called snapshots. Okay. So if you go into your Android SDK and you go to the virtual device manager, you select the virtual device that you want to work with, and you edit it, all you have to do is check snapshots. Okay? And what a snapshot does is it's the same thing as a snapshot in a virtual machine, right? So it saves the state. So in effect, you're suspending instead of powering off and powering on. Okay? On this laptop here that I'm doing the demo, using snapshot, changed it from 3 minutes to actually start up the emulator to 12 seconds. Okay? And so when you're trying to run automated tests, especially every time you build, that makes a lot of difference. Okay? Your mileage may vary a little bit, it depends. There are a few other things that you can do as well. You can, when you create the virtual machine, you can turn off the sound, you can turn off the geolocation, you can turn off the animations. Right? That should speed it up a little bit. You can also run it in headless mode if you don't want to see it, then it will run a little bit faster. Okay, but those are just 1 or 2 seconds is the only difference I have on my machine. The biggest one is using the snapshots. Okay. And once you select that and save it, then all the command line will just use the snapshot, so everything works. Okay. And then you just write normal Selenium scripts, right? In any language that you want, as long as that language is Python. No. You can use it, I mean, it's normal Selenium. You can use any language that you want. So a normal Selenium script, like this one, where we browse the code tag, we select the radio button, type in some information, verify the screen, will work. Right? So there should, knock on wood, be no modification. All right? So let's go into some demos of how that actually works. All right? Before I get into the demo, though, is everybody okay? Anybody have any questions? Okay, if I'm going too fast, just yell at me. All right? Tell me to stop, because sometimes I get a bit excited, so you might want to slow me down. Okay. So let's see here. We will start with Android. So if, oops. Let's see. Okay. All right. So the script that I just showed you to actually run, if I type it here, let's see. Okay. So this is the script. So if I run Android, this is basically going to start up the virtual machine. Oops, if I actually run it.
Can you bump up the font a little bit?
Can I bump up the font? Yeah, I think so. Alright, does that help?
Much better.
Okay. Okay, so that's going to start up the emulator, and you'll notice that it's already up. Alright, I mean, again, so now I'm actually trying to start the, at this point, the command would have already returned. Alright, so I'm trying to start up WebDriver. Okay, so now the WebDriver started up. Okay, so that's about 12, 15 seconds, which is much faster than 3 minutes. Okay, so the snapshots make a lot of difference. Okay, once I have WebDriver up, I can take a particular script. So in this case, this is my script. It's a simple script. The implicit wait is a whatever functionality that basically says just keep trying for up to 5 seconds. Okay, because for web or for the emulator, sometimes things are slow, so it keeps trying. But basically, I have a loop. In this case, the loop is just one. But I go to codepad.org, I select the radio button. I fill in, so codepad.org is a site where you can type in code for any language and it'll execute it for you. All right, so here I'm just printing hello world, and then I submit, and then I verify that it was actually displayed on the page. Okay. So if I run this, and down here is just a test runner, which allows me to run it in different browsers or different things like, or the Android or whatever. So if I run it this way, so I'll do a standard browser first. Let's just run it in Chrome. Okay. And I'll move that. So Chrome will come up. It'll go to codepad.org.
So you will need to install the plugin for Chrome also, right?
Okay, yeah. As part of Selenium setup, there's a Chrome driver, which actually now ships with Chrome. So if you have Chrome, you already have the Chrome driver.
Okay.
You just have to set the path. Okay, so it goes to the site. It's selected the Python radio button. Up here. Type print hello world, click submit. Just wait for it to submit. And then it verifies that it actually executed the code. So it looks for the hello world. Okay, it's finished already. And then in this particular script, it actually closes the browser. Okay. So in the Python world, when it succeeds, you get a dot. When it fails, you get an X. So I got a dot. So we get really happy over dots. We start celebrating over dots. Okay, so the exact same script, if I simply change to Android, all right, it will now find this guy, all right, and it will run it there. All right, so you see it's going to the website, selecting Python, type in, actually type. It's a little bit hard to see, but you saw it actually bring up the keyboard and typing. All right, and then it goes. Okay, the Android browser doesn't stop. Okay, you'll notice that the Android takes longer to run. Okay, again, talk to Google. I don't know what to tell you. The emulator is, technically the emulator is a virtual machine, so you have to give them, a little bit of slack, right? But it is a bit slower. And I think now it's good. Still running. Okay. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so it's finished, and then it blanks out the screen. All right. If I wanted to run on the iPhone, all right. Let me do something here real quick. I'm just gonna pop up my screen here. Okay, cool. All right, so this is my iPhone. You see the screen here. All right, so for the iPhone and also for the Android, if you're going to run on a particular device, you can install the web driver, which is this guy. So the same way that we install it on the virtual machine is the same way that you install it on Android. Okay, for iPhone, we'll show you in just a minute. You use Xcode and you just push it there. Okay, so once I start this, then I have a server which is running. All right, and so what you see on my screen is the same that you should see on my phone now. So if I run here, and I say let's run on the iPhone 4, okay. Then the same script will now connect to the iPhone 4, it will start running. Okay, and so you guys can see here if you want to look as well. So it's actually running on a real device. All right. So all this is AirPlay, what you see here. So I'm just mirroring the screen through AirPlay, so it's easier to see. Okay. So there's no magic going on. Right? I mean, the magic is in the web driver itself. Okay. And again, we're using the same script. All right. So as long as your website is the same, then your script is the same. Okay. If you have custom websites for different browsers, then you're going to have to write different scripts. Okay. But if your website stays the same, then you have the same script. It should work. All right. Just to kind of complete the thing, let's do it for the iPad mini as well. Okay, hold on, let me turn this one on too, so you guys can see it.
They're just showing off how many devices you have.
I wanted to bring like 8 or 9 and have a whole wall. And I said no. Well, you know, that's the great thing about testing mobile, is I have an excuse to buy all this junk. Okay, let me see if I can make this, I'm running out of real estate here. Let's do this half size. Yeah, okay. So again, let's run, I think iPad mini. And that should, yeah. So I run on the iPad mini. Okay. So that has finished. Yeah, okay. And just for fun, we'll run on all of them. And we'll run them at the same time. Okay, so you can, let's say, n equals 3. Okay. Oh, I should have done 4. Hold on. Actually, 4 is, I forgot about Chrome. All right, let's run 4. Now, the thing is, I don't know if I can resize it fast enough for you to see it, but I'll try. Okay, so there's Chrome. You see at the same time the emulator is running, this device is running, and that device is running as well. Okay. So Selenium has also always supported the grid functionality. Okay. So the grid functionality is basically where you have a server and you've got a lot of listeners. All right. So you can set up your devices to different listeners in the grid, so you can run these in parallel as well. All right. Which becomes quite important if you're testing, 10 devices or something like that. You don't have to wait and test them serially. You can test them all at the same time. All right. And then whichever test driver, in this case we're using Python unit test, so Python unit test will handle gathering all the results and generating a report and that sort of thing, right? Yeah, okay. And because I'm doing a demo, something failed, all right? But, okay, so one of the asserts didn't actually work, so it didn't actually load the page. Here it is. It's your Android emulator being too slow. It didn't switch to the next page. Okay. So again, that's valid, right? Because you want your test to detect that. So it didn't go to the next page, so it actually failed. And of course, it looks like the demo gods are not smiling on me. All right. If you do want to do it from an iPhone or an iOS emulator, then you need Xcode. All right. And because of how Apple works, if you want to deploy any app to your own device, which isn't from the App Store, you have to actually be an Apple developer. All right, so you have to sign up, pay the 99 bucks or whatever it is. Okay. Once you do that, from the Selenium site, you can get this iWeb Xcode project, okay, which is the source code for WebDriver. Okay, so once you have the source code from WebDriver, you can run it from a simulator. Okay, I think that if you're running from a simulator, you don't have to sign up. If I want to deploy this to the actual devices, like I was doing, then you have to sign up. Okay. So if I'm just using the simulator, I can select the simulator, and I can just run, and it will bring up, okay, the WebDriver, the simulator here, and then again, I can run the same commands, and then it'll push it to the simulator, just like I did with the other devices. Okay. I think you guys are all probably tired of seeing the same test run, so I won't run it again. Okay, but that's how it works. Yeah.
Is this a phone gap application or?
Which one?
The current one.
Oh, the one that I'm testing
The
against.
one you're testing is the.
No, this is a standard. This is actually standard HTML. It's codepad.org.
But can you use phone gap as well?
You can use phone gap, because I mean, at the end, phone gap it produces HTML and HTML5 and JavaScript.
Yeah.
This is your output, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so when you have HTML and JavaScript, Selenium will interact and control all you want.
Native applications is out of reach, right? So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here we're just talking about mobile web.
yeah.
Okay. So it's just going through the browser. So what's behind the browser, it doesn't know. So how the WebDriver works is WebDriver is actually part of the browser itself. Okay. So for example, on I don't know if you do iOS development, but iOS, the browser is basically a web UI component. Okay. And so what Selenium does is it opens the same web UI component and just throws commands at it. Okay. So the commands, you see the commands were basically, so I find an element, so the CSS selector, click, send keys, check like page source, read, and stuff like that. So it's coming from the browser. So actually, Selenium has no idea what the backend code is. Okay, so that could be a JSP, it could be JavaScript, it could be static HTML. It's just using basically a browser API to execute. Okay, but yeah, for native apps, if you take your phone and you're compiling it to native apps, you can't do native apps with Selenium. Okay. There is a project in the works called Appium, which uses the Selenium API, and it's supposed to target native apps. Right now it's iOS only, and it's pretty new. Okay, but they have a plan to do that. It's just not here yet. Okay. Which is a good segue into my next topic, actually, which is native apps. So thanks for the question. Let me go back to. Okay. Yeah. So just to go back for iOS, the WebDriver project you can get from the Selenium repository. You just download it. There's an iWebDriver.xcode project, which is the one that I just ran. Okay. Again, if you want to use the simulator, you just run it. If you want to put it on your actual devices, then you have to be a developer. It just works out of the box unless you're using a newer version of Xcode, Xcode 4.2 or above. Then you have to add one setting in the build settings tab to your architecture RFP, and then it will work. Okay. So that's about it for that. Okay. So the key points here is we're using Selenium. So it's the same script for all browsers. This is the whole idea of Selenium. This is why they switched to Selenium 2 WebDriver. All right. Now that is true in a lot of cases, but it's not true in all cases. It depends on how you actually architect your application. So I intentionally picked a very simple app so that it would work. Okay. Like for example, a jQuery UI. A lot of people use the jQuery UI components. Those are not 100% cross-compatible. So they do different things on different browsers in certain cases. Okay. So if that's the case, then you might have to, put if statements in your script, or maybe have separate scripts or something like that to target different platforms. You just kind of have to try and see. It depends upon your application and where you go. Okay. Theoretically, it should be the same. Okay? I mean, the jQuery UI, they have announced that is their goal, to have one framework to rule them all. But they're targeting what, 2016, I think, is when they can have that done. So there will be some differences. All right, and obviously, the more complicated your application is, the more it's going to take. Right? You do have access to stuff like orientation, so you can detect orientation, or you can flip the device if you're doing mobile web. You can access the JStorage, you can execute jQuery and all that, so it can be quite powerful. Right? It also helps to write testable code. So anytime you talk about GUI testing, right, for Selenium, mainly what you're using is CSS selectors, or IDs. All right? So if you have a component, give it an ID, and then your Selenium testing will be very easy. Okay? You start to do these dynamic generated IDs, and it's a pain in the butt. Okay? Get good at waiting. Selenium is much faster than your application is. Right? So oftentimes it will go ahead before your application does, especially if you're doing Ajax, because it doesn't know about Ajax calls. So you'll have to put a lot of, you can actually, wait for a component to have a particular property, like wait for a text box to be enabled, or wait for something to appear on the screen, or something like that. So you'll have to do a lot of that. Again, I'm not really trying to do a Selenium tutorial here. We can do that at another time, but just to give you some ideas. And then, of course, we tie it into our CI server, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. All right, but we want to run it all the time. Okay. So that's kind of how we target the web. All right, we use Selenium. It's basically, once you get it set up, there's a little bit more setup, but then once you get it set up, it's no different from testing standard web. All right, you're not testing mobile web. Okay. Now, if you want to do native apps, even if you're using PhoneGap, for example, or what's the other one, Sprout Core, or any of these kind of all-purpose, write once and give me lots of apps. The best tool, there's several tools out there. All right. The best tool that works across iOS and Android, in my opinion, bar none, is TouchTest. Okay. The idea of TouchTest is TouchTest runs on real devices. Okay. It can run on emulators as well, but it's targeted for real devices. Using the actual app, we can actually record. So as you use your device, it will actually record and replay. And it's set up so that it works with continuous integration testing. Okay. I don't know of any other tool that can do those three things on actual mobile devices for native apps. Okay, so as far as I know, this is the only tool that can actually do it. There are some, like Appium can do it for iOS, but it can't do it for Android, and it only does part of iOS. There's, Android has the, what is it, the monkey something? Monkey Runner, yeah. So Monkey Runner will do Android pretty well, but it won't do iOS, and it doesn't have a recorder, and it's low-level JUnit sort of testing. But just kind of all around it, I think TouchTest is a really good one. However, for TouchTest, the way that TouchTest works is it actually injects code into your code. Okay, so there's a TouchTest library which you have to use to instrument your app. All right, so you have to. They've got this Java make app touch testable, which basically takes their library and it sticks it onto your library and then builds it. All right, and so the idea is you're going to have one version of your app which goes to the App Store for deployment, of a separate version which goes to your actual devices for testing. All right. So they've made it pretty easy. They give you this jar file. You pass in. This is an iOS example. So the name of the project, the target, which build target you want, the URL. So I'll show you the TouchTest web interface in a minute, but this is the TouchTest web interface, and then you log in, and that will generate an app for you, which you can then push to your device. And once you push to your device, you can record and replay with that app. Okay, so it does require it to be instrumented. So I think TouchTest, the best way to understand it is actually see a demo. The way that TouchTest ships is it ships as a virtual machine. So I've got a virtual machine running, and this is basically the interface. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to do a test for a chess app. Okay, this happened to be the open source app that I found. Okay, so in order to do that, the first thing I have to do is make the application touch testable, as they say. So I've got a command hidden here somewhere. What am I? Where is it? I think it's yeah. Okay. So this is the touch test for this particular app. So in this case, the application is called Stockfish. All right. So if I run this, it will in effect make it touch testable. So let me copy this and give me a command window. Okay. And it all should work. All right. And so it basically just says, okay, we've modified. This is what we've come up with. Okay. Again, I have iOS devices, so this is an iOS example. So it's going to go here. This is what I modified. This is the actual Stockfish application. So if you guys know iOS, it's basically adding some linking to the TouchTest library, all right, and then deploying everything. Okay, so from here, I'm actually going to deploy this to the iPad. Okay, so if I go here, we'll turn this one off. Use this one for now. Okay. So this is the app, right? And I can't actually. That's just a viewer. I can't actually drive it. Let me turn it around. All right, but it's just a chess. I can move around and play chess, and it plays with me. Okay. Once I have this app deployed on my phone, I can now connect to it through TouchTest. All right. So if I go into, I've got too many windows open. What is it called? Okay. So I can go, let's say, create a new clip. The way that TouchTest is kind of designed to be like iTunes. So you create clips, and then those clips, I got the wrong URL. So the idea is you get clips, and you can think of them as sound clips, and then you put them together to build scripts. So it's kind of like a clip is like a reusable function, and then you put them together to build scripts. Okay, we're going to do a very simple one, just to give you an idea. So here I can say record. TouchTest will do mobile web as well. All right? So it'll do everything that Selenium will do. But if you're purely doing mobile web, you probably don't need TouchTest. Selenium is easy. Okay, if you want to do apps and mobile web, then okay, TouchTest is fine. Okay, what we have to do here is basically go to a URL, and it should connect if I go to the right one. Whoops. You guys can't see what I'm looking at. Where did that thing go? Okay, we'll do it again. Oh, sorry. Both at the same time, right? So basically, you just have to log in from your device. And what this is doing is it's creating a tunnel. So you know how we kind of did it from the command line in Android here. It's kind of all GUI driven. If I go to the right URL. Okay, this is going to be a problem. Let me see. The only okay, is it going to work? Okay, cool. I think we're okay. All right, so this is the on the device here. This is the TouchTest agent. So I basically open this, and it provides a tunnel from Cloud Test Lite or TouchTest from the actual application to the device that you want to record on. All right. So once I have that enabled, then I can create a clip. I can record, let's say, a mobile app. All right. It should show me that it's connected, and this is the app. Okay. So because it can basically auto-detect whatever apps that you have that are touch testable. So if I've got 15 apps, it'll show me all 15 apps, and then whatever devices I have registered, it'll show me. So in this case, I'm just going to say record. And what it does, if I switch back here, is so it automatically opens up the application for me. All right, and I'm going to try to show you both at the same time. It's not a lot of screen room, but so as I start using the app here, let's say they're both. Okay. You'll see what it's doing here on the left-hand side is it's actually recording what I'm doing, right? So it sees tap, and it's identifying. So it's using the same API that you use to develop code, okay? So this is actually a UI toolbar text button, right? Which is the same thing that you would create, okay? So it actually uses the iOS API, okay? And for Android, it uses the Android API. It can also do things, so like if I turn my device, it will automatically turn it, and it will record. So it records a port up, so it can record rotation. Because it's instrumented, anything that you can detect from code, it can detect, because it's using the exact same API. Okay, so in terms of coverage, there's nothing that you can do in your app which it cannot record. All right, so in that respect, it's very good. Okay, so if I do this, let's see, I'll move this guy here. I'm going to play myself in a game of chess. Now the question is, can I beat myself? I'll go here. Let's try to do a simple one here. Make it easy for myself to win. Oh, I did it wrong. Can't even beat myself. Okay, I think that's it. No, it's still not right. Okay. Anyways, I can't even see. I'm not very good at chess, man. I can't even win against myself. When you're done, you simply just stop recording. All right, and it will compile the app, and then it just switches back in the agent mode, just waiting for your next command or what have you. Okay. So you notice what it's done is it's recorded each app, so each action. I've got an operation, and then this is what I did the operation on. Okay, so I've done taps, I've done port ups, I've done pans, I've done drags. Okay, everything is there. We can play it back. Let's open in text composition. Get back all right, and when I click play here, it will actually connect to the device. The application will open in the device, so even changing the orientation happens. Notice I didn't change the device itself. Okay. So everything that I've done is played back, as and when I did it. So, and again, because it's using the native API, you can do Angry Birds, you can do anything, right? As long as you can, it's your app, you have to be able to instrument it, right? So as long as you instrument it, you can do whatever you want, okay? And in that case, it's very powerful, right? And also because it's using, if we go back here, we look at like the locators. So for example, when I move a piece, it's automatically trying to find an ID, all right? So if you have, like in this particular app, the buttons are in a different place on the iPhone version versus the iPad version. But because it's the ID, the location doesn't matter. Okay? So I can have a script and I can run it across multiple devices. Okay? If I've got an app which deploys on iOS and on Android, then the same script will work as well. Right? As long as you use the same IDs. Right? I mean, it's not going to be a UI widget, a UI toolbar text button in Android. It'll be the Android equivalent. Okay? But if you have the same ID, it'll still be able to translate and do that sort of thing. Okay? So it's quite good in those respects. You can do a lot of things, which again, I don't want to do a full tutorial on how to do the scripting, but you can go in here on a particular step and do like verifications or outputs or screenshots or whatever it is that you want to do. So I can put in a validation. I've got a ton of different validations that I can use. And again, the validations are all using the API. Right? So it's not like, well, it can take screenshots, but it doesn't generally do screenshot comparisons. So you'll take a particular, like a locator. So in this case, if I want to validate that a toolbar button is there, I can actually say, look for UI toolbar text button 0, right, and verify that it's present, or all these different things. Check all of its statuses. All right. I can do things like take screenshots, or there hasn't been anything that I've needed to do as a tester that I can't do with this. Let me just put it that way. All right. So it's got pretty much everything in there. All right. And once you do those, you can run those. Let me save this. And you'll be able to see if I run this again. So notice also as it's running, it's keeping track of like statistics, like CPU, memory, battery life, bytes sent, and that sort of thing. So I mean, it's not like performance testing, but it's just kind of giving you an idea of if you've got certain sections of your code which are taking a lot, CPU or whatever, then those will pop up real quick and you'll see it. So I can go here and I can look at, problem is I don't have enough screen real estate. It's a bit hard to see, you need a bigger, okay. So I mean, this was my actual validation, so verify that it was present, it shows me that it passed, it shows me the output here. If I want, I can set it to take screenshots, it'll show me screenshots and all of that information, okay. So it's really, in terms of app testing, we haven't found a better one. Okay, this is a commercial tool, you do have to pay for it. As opposed to Selenium, which is an open source. We like to use open source where we can, but for native apps, there's really, the only thing close is Appium. But Appium, I think, give it a couple of years, then maybe it'll be good. At this point, it's still pretty new.
So there's a light version of this as well?
Okay, yeah, so this, what I'm using here is the light version. So the light version gives you one device.
Oh, so
You can run as many tests as you want, but you only get one device.
Okay.
So if you want multiple devices, then you have to pay for it. And there's a couple of ways. I mean, you can buy from SOAS to direct. We're actually in the process of setting up a mobile lab where we're going to buy the license and then just provide like a monthly fee, and you can get access to whatever devices or executions you want. So with which kind of goes into the next topic, which I don't really have a lot of way to demo here, but basically, TouchTest was designed from the beginning to be able to run through Jenkins or through Bamboo. All right. So the way that we will set up our mobile lab is we'll basically give you a Jenkins in the cloud, right? And then you just check into your GitHub, and it'll execute the tests. And there's a Jenkins plugin specifically for cloud tests, which will show you this exact screen, so you get all the results, and you can go through and find the results. It also generates your standard JUnit XML reports, so it'll plug into Jenkins has all the inbuilt support for JUnit as well. Okay. So from a continuous integration perspective, it's built to handle that. So there's command line tools to do all of this. Okay. So you can. The other thing is, when I run this, I don't have to be plugged in. So this is now not plugged in. It's just a device that exists on the internet, and it will still run. Okay. So it routes through the internet. It's not most of the other. Well, you can't see it. Hang on. Okay. You can see that it's actually running even though it's not plugged in. So most of the other devices, you actually do have to be tethered. Okay. But when we're setting up a mobile lab and we've got 15 devices, well, it's hard to find USB ports to tether them to. All right. So as long as you're routable on the network, then it'll find it.
So this mobile lab, would that be available, accessible online, or you have to actually go to your office?
No, we will have it online.
Okay.
I mean,
So
at this point, as of today, you have to go to our office,
yeah.
but in probably a month or two, it'll be available online.
And there will only be one test. You can only run when you have physical devices, right? So you have to.
Yeah. Well, our initial is 10 devices.
Okay.
So we'll have 10 devices, and then we will handle the scheduling from the Jenkins side of things. So we just make sure that jobs don't run at the same time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, our estimation is we can probably handle with 10 devices very easily 50 to 60 clients, because it's very light. There's not a lot of. Most people build 3 or 4 times a day. Not much more than that. So it depends on how long. I mean, at this point, we kind of got to try it for a little bit and see how it works. But yeah, we'll build as we need to build. Sort of thing. But yeah, so the whole idea is you just upload your scripts and that's it. Or basically you just connect the GitHub URL and we'll take care of the rest.
Does it come with a defect tracking management system as well?
For TouchTest itself, no. I mean, this is just the automation tool. Yeah, so again, if you look at a full offering, you would probably want this, you'd want Jenkins, and then maybe, Jira or whatever, Track or something like that to manage the defects, and then you pretty much have everything you need. Okay, any questions more on TouchTest? Okay. Yeah, so a couple of key points. I mean, as you saw, the recording is dead simple. Now, I will tell you that that recording works about 75–80% of the time. Depending on your application, sometimes you have to put some logic in there. You know, a script isn't always record and replay. Okay? There is a scripting language to TouchTest, and the scripting language is JavaScript. So anything that you can do with JavaScript, you can do with TouchTest. All right. So when you're talking, and so in this case, you JavaScript, but you have access to the iOS libraries through TouchTest, so you can pretty much do anything that you want. Right? But yes.
So the recording is also, it records in JavaScript. So
yeah, so it
start
generates
out recording and then you just go in and modify it to make it as complex as you want.
Exactly. I mean, they try to hide it all from you, but you can get into it if you need to. So it can automate pretty much any app or anything your app or your device can do. Right? So basically, if you can access it from the SDK, then you can access it from TouchTest because you're using the exact same SDK you're using to develop it. You can automate. It can also do mobile web. So if you're doing, you know, a lot of apps and you have a little bit of web, then I would say just use the one tool. Right? If you're doing a lot of web, you know, use Selenium. Right? If you're doing kind of 50-50, then maybe you use more. And it can, I mean, I showed you iOS today. I didn't have an Android device available to use, but it does the same thing. It works the exact same way. Okay, Android, it uses Eclipse instead of, you know, Xcode, so what have you. There are also, like I said, there are command line tools, so I can do all of the build, the deployment, and everything from the command line so that I can run it from Jenkins. So I don't actually, so the way that, well, we'll get to continuous integration in a second. But it supports emulators as well as real devices. There's a lot of asserts and verifications. Okay. So it's quite good. There's other tools as well. So there's performance testing tools and monitoring tools that use this exact same script and integration, but maybe another day. But the ultimate goal, really, because this is the continuous integration and testing user group, and not just the testing user group, is the continuous integration. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a demo working to show you this. Right? But the idea is once you build these scripts, whether you're using Selenium or whether you're using TouchTest, I mean, one of the reasons why we pick both of these tools is because they're built from the ground up with continuous integration support. Which means you can write your code, check it into whatever source code repository that you want to use. Right? It will be built by, you know, Jenkins or Bamboo or BuildBot or whatever continuous integration server that you want to use. Okay? In the case of TouchTest, it can actually deploy to actual devices from the continuous integration server. So, in fact, you can do that with Selenium. I mean, you don't need TouchTest to actually do that. You have command line tools for Xcode and command line tools for as part of the Android SDK that will do that for you. Right? But because of the instrumentation that TouchTest is using, is just producing another you know, APK file or, you know, an app file, then it will just fit into the normal process and it can be deployed directly from continuous integration. You can run the tests, right? And then if you want, you can even push directly to the App Store from your continuous integration server. That would maybe be a little bit risky, but you know, if you're brave, you're pretty sure that you've tested, so you can go the whole round. Okay, so these tools that we talked about today, they both support kind of the whole process. So you don't need to kind of stop halfway or anything like that. That's what I got. What do you guys think? Anybody have any questions? Comments? Smart remarks? Funny jokes? Yeah.
Sorry, I might have missed a little bit when you were saying just now. So if you do a recording for iOS just now, and for mobile device, you can pick out an access 7 with the Android system. Does it automatically translate all those things? Yes.
So the only thing is that you have to use the same locators. Okay, so if you're using IDs, then you have to have your same ID in your Android app as you do in your, your iOS app or something like that. So basically, if you want to do that, stick to IDs. Because some of the other, like class name locator, won't really work because we have different class names. You know, it will translate. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate you listening. feel free to come by if you want to talk individually.